What happens when the American dream is built on top of a toxic nightmare? We're about to dive into the story of the Love Canal tragedy, a shocking tale of corporate negligence and the incredible power of everyday citizens who fought back and changed our country forever.
I mean, just look at this contrast. On one hand, you have the idyllic promise from an old ad jingle, Love's new model city. And on the other, a desperate handwritten sign from a resident. This story lives in that jarring gap between a beautiful promise and a toxic reality.
All right, so let's get right into it. How on earth does a place literally named Love Canal become a national symbol for poison? Well, believe it or not, the story doesn't start with chemicals. It starts with a big, ambitious dream.
Okay, so picture this. It's the 1890s. An entrepreneur named William T. Love has this grand vision for a perfect, futuristic city powered by the Niagara River. He starts digging a massive canal, but the money dries up and the whole project gets abandoned. For decades, it's just a big hole in the ground. Then, in 1942, the Hooker Chemical Company comes along and sees not a failed dream, but a really convenient landfill. By 1953, it's packed to the brim with their waste. So what do? They just cover it up with dirt and sell the whole toxic mess to the local school board. The price? $1 single.
Let that number sink in for a second. 21,800 tons. That's how much industrial chemical waste Hookers sealed into that canal. And we're not talking about old newspapers here. This was a nasty cocktail of chemicals, including known carcinogens like benzene and dioxin, just buried right underfoot.
And here's the kicker. For that $1, the company slipped a clause into the deed that they believed washed their hands of any future responsibility. Think about that. They basically armed a chemical time bomb, sold it for pocket change, and just walked away.
So you can probably guess what happened next, right? It was, tragically, almost inevitable. A school gets built right on the land. A whole neighborhood springs up, and hundreds of families move in with absolutely no idea what was lurking just a few feet beneath their homes. By the 1970s, the nightmare began to surface, and I mean that literally. Corroding barrels of waste started pushing their way up into people's backyards. After it rained, a horrible chemical smell would fill the air. Kids would play in these strange, noxious puddles and come home with chemical burns on their hands and faces. And then, the most terrifying part. Residents started noticing a heartbreaking pattern of miscarriages, birth defects, and all kinds of serious illnesses.
Then in 1978, the whole thing just blew up into a national emergency. Heavy rains pushed this toxic soup up and out of the ground, seeping into basements and yards. Investigations found a mind-boggling 82 different chemical compounds percolating through the soil, 11 of them known to cause cancer. That time bomb Hooker had buried? Well, it wasn't ticking anymore. It was detonating.
You know, in moments of crisis, sometimes the most unlikely heroes step up. Enter Lois Gibbs. She was a mother and a housewife with zero political experience. But when her own son got terribly sick and the officials were basically telling everyone not to worry, she just wasn't having it. She started knocking on doors, organizing her neighbors, and demanding answers. She turned herself into a force to be reckoned with.
Now, this fight for Love Canal wasn't just against a corporation or the government. It became a battle over the truth itself. It pitted the official, by-the-book science of health authorities against the lived experience and citizen science of the residents.
So check this out. The Department of Health was working with a standard model. They just assumed the chemicals would spread out evenly, like ripples in a pond. But Lois Gibbs, she was listening to her older neighbors, the ones who knew the history of the land. She got a map and started sticking pins in it for every reported illness. And you know what? The pins didn't make a nice, neat circle. They formed lines, following the paths of old, buried streams that were acting like secret underground highways for all that toxic waste.
And this, right here, gets to the absolute heart of the conflict. It wasn't just about data. It was about values. The health officials were terrified of making what's called the Type 1 error, a false alarm. They didn't want to cause a panic and spend tons of money unnecessarily. But the residents? They were terrified of the opposite, a Type 2 error, missing a real danger. For them, underestimating the risk could mean their lives. It all boils down to one fundamental question. Which mistake is worse?
So the residents, led by Lois Gibbs and armed with their pin maps, they actually did it. They made the world listen. And the fallout from their fight was absolutely massive. It's still impacting us to this day.
Their fight set off this incredible chain reaction. First, New York declared a state of emergency. Then, President Jimmy Carter himself authorized federal aid to evacuate hundreds of families. And the biggest thing? The real game changer? The Love Canal disaster directly led Congress to create the Superfund program in 1980, a landmark law that provides federal money to clean up the nation's most hazardous waste sites, a law that is still used today.
But what about the people who lived there? What were the long-term health effects? Well, a major study in 2008 tried to answer that, and the picture it painted was really complicated. They found no overall increase in deaths or deaths from all cancers combined. But, and this is a huge but, they did find higher rates of death from heart attacks compared to the rest of the state, and a really troubling increase in deaths from accidents and suicides, especially among the women.
So was it the chemicals, or was it the unbelievable prolonged psychological stress of fighting for your family's life, of being told you were crazy, of losing your home? The researchers concluded they couldn't definitively say. The science was, in their words, equivocal. It just couldn't separate the physical poison from the psychological trauma.
And that leaves us with the enduring legacy of Love Canal. It's not just about one specific place or chemical. The tragedy forced a question that we are still grappling with today in debates about everything from new technologies to climate change. When the science isn't 100% certain, but the potential for harm is enormous, who should bear the burden of that risk, the producer or the public?